Welcome to our channel. What if the pennies in your pocket were worth thousands? Some Lincoln pennies, once just ordinary change, have become ultra-rare treasures. Make sure to watch till the end, as we reveal the secrets behind the most valuable Lincoln pennies ever discovered. In the early 2000s, the Lincoln Memorial cent had already become a long-standing icon of American coinage. Introduced in 1959 to replace the wheat reverse that had been used since 1909, it featured the stately Lincoln Memorial in sharp relief, a nod to the president who preserved the Union during its darkest hour. The obverse remained unchanged for decades, a simple, dignified bust of Lincoln created by Victor David Brenner, whose initials are famously tucked below Lincoln's shoulder. By 2007, the design had remained virtually untouched for nearly 50 years. But the winds of change were beginning to stir. Behind the scenes, the United States Mint was preparing to mark the upcoming 2009 bicentennial of Lincoln's birth with 4 brand new reverse designs, each reflecting a different chapter of his life. Collectors and historians alike anticipated the change. What few realized at the time, however, was that the coins of 2007, especially those minted in Denver, would come to hold a different kind of significance. In 2007, at the sprawling Denver Mint facility, machines operated with mechanical precision, pressing billions of coins destined for circulation. Among them, the 1-cent piece continued to be produced in vast numbers, over 3.5 billion units that year alone. The composition remained the same as it had since 1982, a zinc core with a thin copper plating. By this point, the cost to manufacture a penny had already begun to exceed its face value, but tradition held strong, and production carried on. Most of these coins were meant to be spent and forgotten. But a small subset was not. For collectors, the U.S. Mint had been producing annual mint sets, carefully packaged selections of coins from that year, struck with slightly different treatment. Instead of the business strikes intended for circulation, these collector coins were produced using specially prepared dies. They had a satin finish, subtler than the mirror-like proof coins, yet smoother and more uniform than the coins clinking in your pocket. Only around 895,000 of these 2007 satin finish Lincoln cents were produced. While not a minuscule number by numismatic standards, it was a tiny fraction compared to the billions of regular issues. They were never meant to enter circulation. They were intended for collectors, people who would appreciate the difference, protect them in folders or albums, and perhaps, over time, see their value grow. But even within this limited run, there were surprises. As collectors opened their mint sets, a few began to notice anomalies. The kind of subtle, easily missed details that only seasoned eyes would spot, doubling on the date or lettering, slight irregularities in the memorial columns, an unusual gloss to the fields of the coin. What followed was the slow burn of discovery, the realization that not every 2007 satin finish penny was the same. A handful exhibited what numismatists refer to as die errors, slips in the minting process that can lead to double dies, misalignments, off-center strikes, and other quirks. In a world where billions of identical coins exist, such mistakes become incredibly valuable. These errors, combined with the already low mintage and superior quality of the satin strikes, sparked a wave of excitement among collectors. At first, these discoveries circulated quietly through hobbyist forums and small coin shows. Someone would mention a peculiar penny they'd found in their mint set. Others would share photos, consult reference guides, and trade notes. Slowly, interest began to grow. Reputable grading companies like PCGS and NGC started seeing more and more of these 2007 satin finish cents arrive at their facilities, sent in by hopeful collectors seeking confirmation of their suspicions. Grading companies evaluate coins on a 70-point scale. Coins in the high 60s, especially those graded MS 68 or higher, are considered nearly perfect. Few modern coins ever achieve such lofty grades. Yet here, among the quiet 2007 mint sets, some pennies were being returned with those very scores. Add an error to the mix, say, a double die or a weak strike, and now you have a modern marvel, a coin of exceptional rarity, pristine condition, and hidden history. Word spread beyond the niche communities. Dealers began to stockpile mint sets. Collectors scrambled to check their albums. Auction houses started taking notice. Then came the sales, quiet at first, a few $100s here, maybe $1,000 for an unusually well-preserved example. But as more people understood what they were looking at, prices began to climb. A single penny, made of copper-plated zinc, virtually indistinguishable from the billions of others at first glance, began commanding attention, yet, unlike the gold coins of the 19th century or the silver dollars of the American frontier, this penny's value wasn't rooted in precious metal. It was rooted in scarcity. In condition. In anomaly. It was a reminder that value isn't always about what something is made from, it's about how rare it is, how perfectly preserved, and how compelling its story has become. By now, the coin collecting world had taken full notice. Articles were published. Coin grading experts discussed the phenomenon in podcasts and at numismatic expos. And the 2007 satin finish Lincoln cent, once overlooked, became one of the most talked about coins in modern U.S. numismatics. As interest surged, so too did the bidding. In one remarkable instance, an exceptionally high-grade specimen, nearly flawless, with a rare error variety, was offered at auction. The bidding was competitive, fierce even. Collectors knew what was at stake. This was a 1-cent piece that had transcended its denomination. And when the final gavel fell, the realized price stunned even seasoned experts. 1 cent struck in 2007. Minted in Denver. Finished in satin. Conditioned to near perfection. Embellished by an error. Sold for $25,000. Up next in our story is the mystery that turned a common pocket coin into an object of fascination. For most people, the 2001 Lincoln penny was just one more in a long line of change passed without thought. But as the years rolled on, something peculiar began to surface. Not all of these coins aged the same way. Some began to show characteristics that couldn't be chalked up to wear and tear. These weren't just old coins. They were different. The signs were subtle at first. A sharper than usual profile of Lincoln. A strangely mirrored field surrounding the portrait. The lines of the Lincoln Memorial were unusually crisp, or in some cases, distorted. A few coins showed faint doubling in the date or lettering, barely visible unless viewed under magnification, but present. Some had planchet flaws, odd surface textures, or slight bends, as if the coin had been struck under different pressure than its peers. The anomalies didn't all come from circulated coins either. Some were discovered in mint sets, sealed and untouched for years. Collectors who had stashed these sets away in 2001 began opening them with fresh eyes, wondering if the rumors were true. Each time they flipped open the cardboard packaging and saw that dull copper glow, there was a pause. Could this be one of them? The 2001 cent had begun to take on a reputation. Dealers at coin shows whispered about clean strikes with unusual reflectivity. Online forums shared images, grainy, magnified, and annotated with arrows pointing to oddities. Some claimed to have pulled perfect examples from bank rolls that had sat undisturbed for years. And though these claims were met with healthy skepticism, every so often, one would be verified. In the background, grading companies started seeing a steady trickle of these coins. Most were ordinary. But a few came in looking immaculate. The kind of pristine detail and unbroken surfaces that are vanishingly rare in a coin meant for mass circulation. These were coins that, for reasons unknown, had dodged the usual dings, friction, and environmental wear. They stood out. Then there were the errors. Not damage from use, but minting errors, actual flaws in the striking process. Broad strikes, where the coin expanded beyond its normal size. Off-center strikes, where the design was pushed to one side. Coins missing part of their copper plating, exposing the silvery zinc beneath. Strike-throughs, where debris or grease had blocked part of the die during the pressing, creating ghost-like impressions or blank spots. Each error added a layer to the puzzle. It wasn't just the finish or preservation, it was the possibility that something unique had happened at the Denver Mint in 2001. Whether it was a batch of faulty dies, a change in press calibration, or simple human oversight, the result was the same: a handful of coins that were, in every sense, not like the others. Collectors who had once passed over the 2001 penny began to look again. They dug through their old collections, checked back corners of drawers, pulled out boxes marked miscellaneous, and gave them fresh scrutiny. At shows, dealers received more and more questions about high-grade 2001 cents. Listings appeared on auction sites describing coins with dramatic errors or MS-68 grades. Prices ticked upward. The coin's appeal wasn't just about money. It was the thrill of the chase. The possibility that something extraordinary had been hiding in plain sight for years. A penny from the 21st century, modern, recent, and easily mistaken for the kind you'd get in change at a gas station, was now being treated like a prize, and then came the breakthrough. A collector, long known in the community for his ability to identify promising coins and bulk lots, made a submission. Among a batch of coins was one 2001 cent that seemed exceptional. It had a full, sharp strike. No blemishes. Satin-like luster across both obverse and reverse. And, most intriguingly, a dramatic die clash, an error where the obverse and reverse dies had struck each other without a coin in between, leaving ghost impressions of each side transferred onto the other. The grading came back quickly. Mint state 69. Near perfection. One of the highest grades ever recorded for the date. But it wasn't just the grade. It was the combination, the error, the finish, the condition, the provenance. When the coin was certified, it was recognized not only as the finest of its type but possibly as a unique specimen. Collectors took notice. The story of this particular coin spread quickly. Photos were shared. Blog posts appeared. Dealers tried to trace where the coin had come from, how it had escaped circulation. The buzz around this single penny was stronger than most modern cents ever received. And then, finally, the moment came. It was brought to auction. A specialized event, attended by seasoned collectors and investors alike. The lot opened quietly, but interest escalated fast. Phone lines lit up. Online bidders chimed in. The auctioneer kept his voice steady, but the energy in the room was unmistakable. Everyone there understood that this wasn't just another error coin. It was the coin, and when the final bid was accepted, when the gavel fell and the room exhaled, the result was made public. The 2001 penny, struck in Denver, zinc and copper, no different in composition from the billions made that year, had sold for $34,000. $34,000 for a single cent, because coins are more than currency. They are artifacts. Mistakes frozen in metal. Accidents turned art. And sometimes, value isn't determined by what something is supposed to be, but by what it accidentally became. So next time you receive change, don't look past the pennies. One of them may be hiding a story. One of them may be the next legend. Some stories begin with thunder, others with a whisper. The story of the 2000 Lincoln penny begins in silence, in the background hum of presses, behind concrete walls at the Denver Mint. Among billions of coins created that year, most were ordinary, destined to disappear into the flow of commerce without ceremony. And yet, one coin, stamped with the letter D, set in motion a quiet mystery that would take years to fully unfold, a coin that would eventually be valued not for its metal, but for what it survived, how it was made, and what secrets it carried. At first glance, the 2000 Lincoln penny looks like every other cent from the early 2000s. Its copper-coated surface, its familiar size and weight, and the stoic profile of Abraham Lincoln seem indistinguishable from millions of others. But as any collector knows, the world of coins is not ruled by the obvious. It's a world where value often lives beneath the surface, where the smallest detail, barely visible to the untrained, can transform a piece of pocket change into a rare historical artifact. The year 2000 marked the final chapter of a century, a symbolic edge between old and new. It was a time of change in technology, in economy, in the way Americans thought about their future. But the Lincoln cent, unchanged in design for decades, remained a constant. On the obverse, Lincoln's bust continued its silent vigil. Created nearly a century earlier by Victor David Brenner, the design had become iconic, his signature resting just below Lincoln's shoulder, often overlooked, yet present in nearly every home in the country. The reverse bore the Lincoln Memorial, a structure built to honor him in Washington, D.C., rendered in miniature with columns and steps, and even the tiny seated figure of Lincoln visible with magnification. The 2000 penny was minted at the Denver Mint, a facility located in Colorado, known for producing circulation coins at scale. That year, the Denver Mint struck more than 8.8 billion pennies. It was a number so large it defied imagination, and the thought that anything struck in those kinds of quantities could ever be rare seemed impossible. But rarity is not always about how many exist. Sometimes, it's about how many survive, and more importantly, how many were born just a little different. It wasn't long before keen-eyed collectors began to notice something unusual in certain 2000 cents. The anomalies were subtle: an unexpected sharpness in the strike, a richer copper tone, strange artifacts on the surface of Lincoln's coat or the base of the memorial. At first, the findings were dismissed. After all, in a year that produced nearly 9 billion coins, a few irregularities were expected. But as reports multiplied and coins were sent in for evaluation, a pattern began to emerge: there were coins struck on slightly misaligned planchets. Others displayed doubling, clear, repeatable die errors where the date, letters, or even parts of Lincoln's profile appeared layered, as if stamped twice. These were not damage marks from circulation. They were flaws in the striking process, true mint errors, and for collectors, those are the most desirable kind. But the story grew more curious still. Some 2,000 D pennies were found with satin-like finishes, smoother than normal circulation strikes. A few exhibited extraordinary condition, near flawless even after 2 decades. These were coins stored untouched, often in mint sets, preserved without exposure to handling or environmental damage. Combined with an error or an unusual finish, condition becomes everything. The search intensified. Dealers began combing through original government-issued sets from 2000. Collectors searched through rolls, examined jars of change that had been untouched for years. The goal? To find that one coin, the one that combined perfection with uniqueness. Because while billions were made, only a tiny handful bore the right characteristics. And those, once discovered, would change hands not for 1 cent, but for thousands of dollars. One story, often repeated in coin circles, tells of a Midwestern collector who stumbled across a roll of 2,000 D pennies purchased in bulk years earlier. At the time, the coins meant nothing to him beyond nostalgia. But curiosity got the better of him one afternoon, and with a magnifier and a steady light, he began inspecting the coins one by one. Most were what he expected: dull, nicked, worn. But one stood out: this penny was clean. Uncirculated. It reflected light differently, softly, evenly, like brushed metal. Lincoln's cheek was smooth, unmarred. The date was bold and deep. And just below the 2000, he noticed something odd: the faintest doubling of the second zero. Not wear, but doubling. He turned the coin in his hand. On the reverse, the columns of the Lincoln Memorial looked slightly off-center. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. He had it graded. It returned with a near top score, mint state 69, and was confirmed as an authentic double die error. Only one known of its kind in that condition. The value, initially estimated at a few hundred, ballooned. Offers came in, each higher than the last. The coin was featured in collector publications. Photos circulated. Then, the phone call came, from a serious buyer representing a private collection. The price they offered exceeded anything the owner had imagined. The sale was made. The coin, a 2,000 D penny, sold for $37,000. It was, and remains, one of the most valuable Lincoln cents ever produced in the modern era. Not for its composition, zinc and copper, but for its anomaly. Its condition. Its story. It was a reminder that sometimes, even the smallest coins have the largest impact. Somewhere, in the pockets of the past, others may still exist. Forgotten in drawers, buried in coin jars, waiting in sealed mint sets on the top shelf of a closet. Every 2,000 D penny is a possibility. And in that chance lies the heart of collecting. The quiet hope that what looks ordinary might, in fact, be extraordinary. Up next in the unfolding journey of this unassuming copper coin comes the moment when the whispers turn into questions, and the questions spark a deeper curiosity. By the early 2000s, collectors had already begun to notice that something wasn't quite right, or perhaps, very right, with a handful of 1991 D Lincoln pennies. Not in the kind of way that shouted from a display case, but in the way that rewards those who look closely. And that's how the legend grew, not through fanfare, but through quiet discoveries made one magnified detail at a time. It began with a faint doubling. The Liberty inscription on one coin seemed to echo, a shallow twin rising just beside the letters. Then another coin appeared with a slightly thicker date, almost as if the 9 had been pressed twice in slightly different directions. These were not post-mint damages, not the result of handling or circulation. These were die issues, real, certified anomalies that pointed to mechanical errors at the Denver Mint in that specific year. collectors, especially those attuned to Lincoln cents, know that die varieties and mint errors are the lifeblood of discovery. A doubled die can turn a coin from common to coveted. And when it's coupled with outstanding condition, when the surfaces gleam, the luster flows evenly, and not a single scratch interrupts the mirrored fields, the stakes rise. Word spread that a few 1991 Lincoln pennies were surfacing in mint sets with finishes that seemed unusual. Some had an almost satiny texture. Others showed faint die polish lines, tiny, linear marks left by tools used to prepare the dies. These polishing patterns, invisible to most, began to form a map, guiding specialists toward the realization that a very small batch of 1991 cents had something different in their DNA. Meanwhile, others were finding coins struck slightly off-center, errors where the die had come down a fraction of a degree too far to one side, leaving one rim narrow and the other wide. These kinds of mistakes don't happen often, and when they do, they're usually caught by the mint's quality control processes. But in 1991, under the pressure of mass production, a few slipped through. Then came the planchet anomalies. One collector noticed a coin that felt lighter in hand. It rang differently when tapped against a glass surface. He weighed it and found it fell below the expected standard for a US cent. What he held, as it turned out, was a 1991 penny struck on a foreign planchet, an extremely rare occurrence where a blank meant for a different denomination, possibly even from another country, was mistakenly fed into the coining press. Every new discovery added a layer to the mystery. Why were so many different types of errors appearing in this one year, from this one mint? The Denver facility, typically known for its efficiency, seemed to have had a moment, a fleeting window, when production imperfections slipped through. And in that narrow window, a handful of coins emerged bearing the hallmarks of something special. The search became more focused. Collectors who had once ignored 1991 rolls began to pull them back from storage. Dealers began listing high-grade examples online with more confidence. Conversations at coin shows now included the phrase, "Have you seen the one with the lamination crack?" or "Mine has the ghosting under the shoulder." But one coin still stood above the rest. A near-pristine example found years later, sitting undisturbed in an old Whitman folder, hidden behind other coins that had long since lost their shine. This one, however, gleamed. Its fields were glassy. The devices, Lincoln's profile, the lettering, the memorial on the reverse, were struck with near-perfect clarity. And beneath that beauty lay a mistake. It was struck on the wrong metal. A foreign planchet, confirmed through metallurgical testing, had somehow made it into the U.S. penny press line and received the Lincoln design. The extraordinary nature of this discovery cannot be overstated. For every coin minted, for every error that slips past the mint's intricate systems, only a few survive unscathed. Only a few are preserved in a way that allows them to be identified, graded, and appreciated. Even fewer of these are found with the kind of finish that catches the eye of professionals. Many of these coins, especially those struck on incorrect planchets, would have been caught early in production, discarded as scrap. That's why this one was so special. It wasn't just the wrong metal, it was a coin that had escaped the scrutiny of the mint's quality control and had continued to live, hidden in plain sight. This wasn't just a coin anymore. It was a survivor. A misfit. An accidental masterpiece that was submitted to a professional grading service and sealed in a tamper-proof slab. The grade? A nearly impossible mint state 69. 1 point away from perfection. The kind of grade almost never given to coins from that era, especially circulation strikes. And paired with its dramatic error, it became one of a kind. But it wasn't just the rarity or the unusual nature of the coin that made it so appealing. It was the story behind it. The narrative of a coin that had slipped through the cracks of history, from its accidental creation to its quiet survival in a collector's folder. It was the idea that this coin, like so many others, had a secret identity. A second chance. It had been born a mistake, but it had grown into something much greater. The final bid, placed by a private collector with a deep interest in Lincoln cents and error coins, sealed the fate of what had once been a 1-cent piece intended for lunch counters and parking meters. That 1991 Lincoln penny sold for $86,000. Now we are exploring one of the rarest and most valuable pennies in American numismatic history, the 1962 USA 1-cent penny. At first glance, this seemingly unremarkable coin may look just like any other penny you've seen circulating in the past. It's copper, it's small, and it's a cent, after all. But don't be fooled. This penny is far from ordinary. In fact, it's one of the most coveted coins among collectors today. The 1962 penny was minted during a time of transition in the United States. The nation was emerging from the shadow of World War II, heading into the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, and coin collectors were continuing to seek out rare pieces. At the Denver Mint, where these pennies were produced, the production was smooth and efficient, as usual. But it was here, within the confines of the minting process, that something extraordinary happened. A tiny mistake, seemingly insignificant at the time, would eventually result in a coin so rare and valuable that it would stun the numismatic community for years to come. In the early days, the 1962 Lincoln penny wasn't exactly thought of as anything out of the ordinary. It was part of the same series of coins that had been in circulation since the early 1900s, with Abraham Lincoln's likeness gracing the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial adorning the reverse. This design had been in place for over 50 years, and the public was accustomed to seeing this penny in their daily transactions. In fact, millions of these pennies were struck that year, approximately 2.6 billion of them at the Denver Mint alone. At that time, no one had any reason to believe that something remarkable would come out of this large production run, but, like most things in life, it's the little things that matter most. Hidden within the masses of 1962 pennies, a small batch would surface years later, catching the attention of collectors for an unexpected reason, an error. More specifically, the 1962 penny became known for its rare double die and planchet issues. Most people wouldn't know what to look for in their change, and why would they? The coin seemed like just another penny. But the observant eye of the numismatist, the coin collector, or the person with an affinity for the rare and unusual began to notice something. On certain 1962 pennies, the inscriptions and images weren't as they should be. A closer examination revealed faint but distinctive doubling in the "Liberty" and "In God We Trust" inscriptions on some coins. These double die errors are some of the most sought after in the world of coin collecting, making these particular pennies intriguing to collectors seeking a rarity in the midst of seemingly ordinary change. However, the truly remarkable discovery came much later, an error that would elevate the 1962 penny to a level of fame it never had before. Some of the pennies from this year, instead of being struck on the correct copper-plated zinc planchets, were instead struck on incorrect planchets, either foreign blanks or improperly prepared ones that didn't meet the mint standards. This mistake, though rare, is a stunning example of a minting anomaly. Foreign planchets are typically used for coins meant for other nations or for coins of different denominations, and their presence in a batch of U.S. pennies was a mistake that had the potential to go unnoticed for decades. When these improperly minted coins made their way into the hands of collectors, their unusual characteristics became evident. These planchet errors were distinct in weight, color, and texture compared to regular pennies. The coins were lighter, with a different sheen and a slightly altered metallic composition. To a trained eye, these differences were obvious, but for years, most of these pennies remained in circulation, unnoticed by the general public, and then, something incredible happened. A few of these error coins, carefully preserved, found their way to professional grading services. One of these 1962 pennies, with its foreign planchet and remarkable preservation, received a grade of mint state 69, just one step away from perfection. The coin's near-flawless condition, paired with its rare and unusual minting error, made it the ultimate collector's item. The coin was submitted for auction, and what happened next shocked the entire numismatic community. Bidding started low, as it often does with unknown or misunderstood pieces. But as the auction went on, the bids began to soar. People in the room, along with phone and online bidders, knew they were witnessing something unique, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to own a piece of American coin history. The bidding war continued, intensifying with every passing minute. The tension in the auction room was palpable. The air was thick with anticipation. The audience could feel the excitement building as the price climbed higher and higher. This wasn't just another coin sale, this was an event. A coin that had been floating around unnoticed for decades was now the star of the show. Every bidder knew they were fighting for a piece of history that, once gone, might never be available again. What had once been a penny that could be found in your pocket was now a rare and valuable treasure, destined to be displayed in a private collection. And then, after a flurry of last-minute bids, the gavel came down. The final price left everyone in stunned silence, followed by a roar of astonished approval. This 1962 D penny, once a simple coin circulating among millions of others, sold for an astonishing $125,000. The 1962 D penny is a coin that reminds us that not all treasures are easy to spot. It shows us that the most seemingly insignificant things can hold untold value. The next time you pick up a penny, remember this story. It might just be one of the most valuable coins you'll ever hold in your hands. And, as this 1962 D penny has shown, sometimes, the most valuable items are hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to discover their true worth.